Good morning. I'm Jeff Shuren. I'm the director of FDA's Center for Devices and Radiological Health. I'd like to welcome you to our 6th town hall meeting. I actually can't believe we started this about a year and a half ago and committed to hold 3 town halls each year in different places in the country. And this is our 6th and last one for 2011. We had started this back in 2010 under the recognition that too often we hear from the public if they would like to come out to Washington, D.C. And normally it's the context of a public meeting where we pick the topic. And we said, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense because many people can't come out to Washington, D.C. So we said, well, why don't we come out to all of you and make this about what you want to talk about? And that's what's the purpose of this town hall, for you to raise issues that are important to you, to ask the questions that are on your mind, and we will try to the best we can answer them. I'm going to apologize in advance as it regards answers to questions. So if you're within the Beltway in Washington, D.C., you will know that if we're in the midst of considering something, we're developing policy, we don't tend to talk about the specifics. It's not been cleared, we have a lot of protocols, and we just simply have to abide by that. Sometimes we can't talk about things because they're privileged or confidential. So I may get into Washington bureaucratic speech. And I will apologize in advance, but we're bound by it. And actually that's a benefit for all because otherwise we start saying one thing and it turns out it changes to something else, creates a lot of confusion and distraction. For this morning, I'm first going to ask if you have a cell phone to please turn it off. I've been asked to do so because as calls come in, even if you're diligent about trying to cut them off, it can interfere with the recordings. They get a lot of noise here. Our town hall meeting is broken up into 2 parts. The first are people who have signed up to speak. I'm going to apologize to a number of people in advance. We had far many more people who wanted to speak then we had time to do so. And we tried to assure that we had people speaking on a range of topics. However, during the question and answer session, which is the second part, anyone can come up to the microphone and ask a question. If you want to make a statement, all I ask is keep it very, very short, really under a minute. Say it, ask a short question so we have ample time to address issues and concerns or comments by anyone else in the audience who wants to come up. Joining me here today is, and I'll ask them to raise their hand or stand up, Steve Silverman, who is the director of our Office of Compliance, and Dr. Alberto Gutierrez, who's the director of our Office of In Vitro Diagnostics. Also helping out is Heather Howell, who is our deputy director of Office of Communications, Education, and Radiological Program. And Heather will be calling up the people who have signed up to speak. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Heather. And again, thank you all for coming.
My question is, how is it possible for the FDA to approve a time-release mercury implant that is by far the predominant source of an individual's exposure to mercury? I practiced employee-protected mercury-free dentistry for 30 years. In that time, I've seen hundreds of people's lives dramatically improved once these mercury-leaking implants were safely removed. I've seen infertile women make a whole family, chronic high blood pressure return to normal, and multiple sclerosis victims totally recover. In fact, it's just such a remarkable recovery that started me on this odyssey of trying to get the regulatory agencies of the US government to fulfill their sworn obligation to us, the people. I'd like you to meet another recovered MS victim, Stacey Case, who should not have been poisoned by her fillings except for the dereliction of duty in Washington, D.C. Stacey, tell them your story.
Thank you, Dr. Kennedy. My name is Stacey Case. I'm a television journalist of 20 years. I anchor the evening newscast in Nashville, working on consumer and investigative reports. Prior to joining Fox, I worked at CBS News as a national correspondent. I have spent 2 decades helping right wrongs, shining a light on injustice, searching for the truth. I've covered the White House, Congress, the United Nations, and yes, FDA regulatory hearings, always with impartiality. But today, I stand before you not as an impartial journalist, but as an injured consumer. Nearly 4 years ago, I let a dentist talk me into having 4 30-year-old silver mercury fillings replaced because he said they were cracked. Your agency at the time, though, the FDA, had done nothing to warn me, an educated professional, that this was a health hazard. This is a great injustice. I had 4 removed and replaced with 4 new shiny mercury fillings because that's what insurance covers. Within a few days, I had this heavy metal taste in my mouth. I kept chewing gum to try to make it go away. As you know from watching Dr. Kennedy's smoking teeth video, that emits more mercury vapor, which is neurotoxic. So within a few weeks, I developed deep, painful headaches. Within a few months, I was experiencing a myriad of neurological symptoms. The sensation of cold water running down my head, pinpricks up and down my arms, having trouble with word recall, cognitive symptoms, which, by the way, is a real problem in my profession. Within 4 months, blurred vision in one eye, tinnitus, ringing in the ear. 7 months after that dental work, I got out of bed one morning, July 7th, 2008, and could not walk. My husband took me to the doctor, who this time said, "Mrs. Case, you either have MS or a brain tumor." The MS diagnosis came within just a few days. My children were 2 and 3 at the time. My immediate concern was, will I be caring for them, or will it be the other way around? I now know that I and millions of other Americans are genetically predisposed to autoimmune disease, and these mercury fillings are the trigger in many cases. As I'm in the trenches with this disease, though, the FDA in 2009 ruled amalgam safe for everyone once again, a missed opportunity. Thankfully, my journalistic instincts kicked in. I spent weeks on the phone and online researching MS and its triggers. I read several dozen scientific studies. One such study, 1990, University of Denmark, proved monkeys with mercury dental fillings stored it in their spinal ganglia, pituitary gland, and many other organs. This stuff seeps into the body from the day it is implanted. Then one day you reach the tipping point like I did, and disease sets in. In my research, I've uncovered plenty of people who've been miraculously cured of MS, all of whom had something interesting in common. They once had these mercury fillings too. So I decided, after much thought and prayer, to make myself the lab rat. What did I have to lose? I had my fillings removed using the IAOMT guidelines, the only safe method. Within a week, wouldn't you know it, I was 50% better. My body was calming down. I then began IV chelation along with a myriad of vitamins, supplements, minerals, acupuncture, and an anti-inflammatory diet, which is very boring to eat. And by my first year checkup with my neurologist, I was in remission from MS and have been ever since, and am on no MS medications because my neurologist says they aren't necessary. I'm doing too well. I have spent $35,000 out of pocket on this elective dental work and these alternative therapies that I've just described to you to rebuild my body and right this wrong. Thank you for convening a scientific panel to reconsider the safety of amalgam. Your hand-picked scientists in 2006 and 2010 have made you keenly aware of the health risks and the disease causation. Please do not ignore them or injured consumers like me any longer. You really want to help this country get healthcare costs under control? Ban amalgam. You really want to see a cure for many autoimmune diseases? Ban amalgam. You really want to ensure American moms like me can play chase with their children in the yard? Ban amalgam. After 2 decades in the news business, I know the truth, and the truth is silver mercury fillings are causing disease, and they are making people sick, keeping them sick, so help me God. Use your power and position for good, Dr. Shuren. Leave a legacy. Please right this wrong. My website is www.mercurymom.com. Thank you.
I have 3 children. One of them died last year. All of them have been affected by mercury at one time or another. But because of time constraints, I'm concentrating my statement on my oldest son, Stephan. Before Stephan was born, he had 20 before Stephan was conceived, I had 20 amalgams and 2 amalgam-filled root canals. At that time, they called everything silver fillings. But anyway, my son Stephan was born in April. He was a healthy baby, but right from the beginning, he had a problem sleeping. He had a really hard time falling asleep, staying asleep, waking up in the morning. I got very little sleep myself. He screamed every night for about a year and a half until we found out that he was allergic to the butter fat in milk. So we mixed up non-fat dry milk for him every day for many years. That seemed to work, more or less. Before Stephan was 3, he had 30 amalgam fillings inserted in his perfectly looking teeth, by the way. I mean, he had tiny pinholes of something that looked like whatever. I don't know what it was, but the dentist thought it was cavities. Anyway, he screamed every night for about a year and a half until we found out that, anyway, yeah, I said that already. Stephan started refusing to eat the foods he had liked before. He disliked odors of any kind. He became cranky. He had less energy. He wanted to be carried all the time. His sleep problems continued. He still hadn't learned to talk. He started talking when he was 3 and a half. And once he started to talk, he always said, "I carry you." He did not say, "Carry me." He said, "I carry you." And that was his way of kind of like saying what he wanted to say. Stephan was very intelligent once he got to elementary school. He had an IQ of 137, but problems started in junior high school. He started to talk about being depressed. He had probably been depressed before that, he just couldn't quite formulate it. The problems got worse in high school. He was placed in a special non-competitive environment at Los Altos High School. All the children in that group were gifted, but a little out of the ordinary. Stephan finished high school half a year early, passing the necessary tests with flying colors. He wound up in who's who of high school students. Stephan couldn't have cared less about that. He did not attend his graduation. By that time, he was very unhappy. He sought help at Kaiser for his depression, but he felt the psychologist didn't take him seriously, so he did not want to go there any longer. All through those years, Stephan had more dental work done. After high school, he attended California State University in Northridge. His experience in Northridge was hampered by his increased depression. I tried to keep in close touch. Often when I called, he told me how he didn't know what to do. He felt so sad, and he knew that he had no reason to be sad. He threatened to commit suicide almost every time I talked to him. He stopped going to school. We had him checked out to find out if anything was wrong with him physically. There was no thyroid problem. He had pain in his kidney area. Doctors checked the kidneys by doing a cystoscopy. I think none of the checkups helped. Stephan worked at the law library part-time for a while, but he was so depressed that he often could not get up in the morning. Meanwhile, I had my 2 front teeth, the root canals, redone, and the upper part of my jaw had a cavitation, and I had a bone transplant from here to there. And that came from I kind of believe from the amalgams that were put in. So getting back to Stephan, anyway, I'm going to skip that. Somewhere along the line, my husband and I decided that the whole family should get rid of their amalgams. I paid out of my own pocket for the removal of 20 amalgams still in his mouth. Anyway, I need to skip that, I suppose. For me, there were months during the 90s also after the amalgam removal that I almost did not sleep at all because of the long, exhausting talks I had with my son to keep him from going off the deep end. It was a terrible time. With Stephan, some mercury was found high up in his cheekbones. He had to have some root canals done as well. If my being here can help prevent any of the experiences I've had with Stephan by seeing mercury kept out of dentists' offices, all these trials will have been worthwhile. Why do I think it is mercury from amalgams? Looking back, as long as I can remember, I've felt bad the day after going to the dentist. I used to think it was the anesthesia. Thank you.
My name is Anita Vasquez-Tibau. I'm a Latina, and I am the Director of Californians for Green Dentistry. I have been doing advocacy work on dentistry for over a decade. I have been working with local, state, national, and international agencies. I've been around the world. I've had the opportunity to witness firsthand the devastating impact of FDA's failure to communicate the risks of dental mercury to the Spanish-speaking community. The FDA is charged with protecting the public. You have this on your website. And yet, when it comes to mercury and dental amalgam, you seem to be completely ignorant. You are all supposed to be experts in your respective fields, and yet you can continue for decades to let mercury, the most toxic, non-radioactive material, go into the mouths of babies. Seeing this agency that everyone around the world calls the gold standard do absolutely nothing when it comes to mercury in dentistry is contemptible. To say that you are a transparent agency is a joke. Spanish-speaking people in this country do not have the same access to the internet, making this entire segment of our population vulnerable and exposed. We are taxpayers like everyone else and expect our government to protect us. Mi gente have told me their dentists have never, ever used the word mercurio in any discussion. Instead, mercury amalgam is deceptively called la amalgama plata, silver fillings. Dr. Shuren, you told European regulators that, quote, we don't use our people as guinea pigs in the US, but FDA admits that amalgam can cause neurological harm in young children. Their developing neurological systems are more sensitive to the neurotoxin effects of mercury vapor, says the FDA. And FDA admits there is no evidence that amalgam is safe in children under the age of 6. No clinical information is available, says the FDA. So why are small Latino children like Anthony Garcia and Zachary Martinez being used as guinea pigs to test a mercury product? Did anyone tell their mothers it is mercurio? How dare you sit up there and let this happen to little kids of any race or ethnicity? This child's mouth is ruined, and no one knows what the health implications will be for him. How can you let this toxic material continue to be used? Do you think that any parent in their right mind would allow a dentist to put this toxic poison into their child's mouth just a few inches from their brain if they knew it was mercury? You have heard the cries of consumers and citizens. You've heard from public officials. And now, our Commander-in-Chief, President Barack Obama, said in his address to Congress, I reject the argument that says for the economy to grow, we have to roll back protections that keep our kids from being exposed to mercury. Because of the FDA's failure to disclose this information to our communities, we have to do your work. We are telling the people what you should be telling us. California cities such as Costa Mesa and Santa Ana have passed resolutions calling on the FDA to ban dental mercury. And they have warnings to parents that say dental amalgam used in many dental fillings causes exposure to mercury, a chemical known to the state of California to cause birth defects or other reproductive harm. Around the world, amalgam is no longer used in children, even in developing countries and especially in Latin America. They are switching to mercury-free alternatives like atraumatic restorative material, commonly known as ART. ART restorations are ideal for children. They cost half as much as amalgam, and according to Pan American Health Organization, They're painless to place, so children cooperate with the treatment, and they can be placed outside of clinics, and they can do it in schools. So why are Hispanic kids in America being subjected to dental mercury when kids in Latin America are benefiting from modern alternatives like art? Has any one of you ever heard the term fiduciary duty, ethical principle, moral values, or even first do no harm? I am so tired of coming before this agency and watching the hundreds of people parade before you all saying the obvious. Mercury is a poison. So what would I like to see? I'd like the FDA to tell everyone that dental mercury is a neurotoxin that poses health risks, and please post it in Spanish. Put this on your website on the first page, not buried deep inside an obscure document. When people have limited access to the internet, this is imperative. And finally, just one more thing. Stop implanting mercury and dental fillings in all kids. Gracias.
My question is, if I hadn't had 17 mercury fillings, would I have needed any of that? And I hear, benefit and risk. What I'd like to, have the new mantra for this millennium is cause, not cure. Because if we can get to the cause, we will have the cures, and we will make people well. Having 17 mercury fillings is what is called iatrogenic medicine. It is a cause. It is mercury. It is toxic. We all know it. I ran into a bunch of scientists in the lobby last night that aren't even here for this, and was just asking them about what they thought mercury was about. They're neuroscientists, and they're like, oh, it's toxic. Well, then why do we have it off-gassing in our mouths? And why, when I was at the 2006 FDA hearings, I was at the 2010 hearings. Why do they say that there's no research when Dr. David Kennedy is there with the smoking teeth, and why we have the science on the Calgary studies, and all of these scientists have done the sheep studies, the monkey studies. I mean, what else do we have to study? Children, in Portugal, that we put mercury into their mouths. They live in an orphanage. Some of them are deaf mutes, and who's watching out for them while we put mercury in them with our money from the U.S., an $11 million NIH study? I don't know, but I think that it's really, I've been around the world as a documentary filmmaker on this topic for 10 years, to the United Nations, to the government reform hearings, the same questions, the same stuff. We're wasting a lot of money and a lot of time while people are really sick, and I've been one of them. I'm 48 years old. I have fought for my life since I was 20. And I thank you for sharing, and I want to introduce Freya Koss because I'm done, and Freya has another huge story.
I'm also another victim of mercury poisoning from dental fillings. Dr. Shoren and I met in Orlando in May, and he really does understand what happened to me. I was struck with double vision and diagnosed with MS, lupus, and myasthenia gravis 7 days after I had an old filling removed and a new one placed. It's been 14 years. I'm still dealing with the remnants of mercury fillings. I had to give up my business. I couldn't take care of my children. And I realized that the public had to be aware of this. And that's what I've devoted myself to for the last 14 years. Dr. Shoren, while you assure us that the FDA hears our concerns and listens to us and takes us seriously, FDA hasn't done anything. They haven't done anything to protect the American public. In 2010, a scientific panel strongly encouraged FDA to discontinue the use of mercury fillings, particularly for pregnant women and children, and to require labeling and warning for all consumers. Still, nothing has been done. As Anita Thibault said, even in the state of California, consumers have been warned since 1986, and I quote, "Dental amalgam causes exposure to mercury, a chemical known to cause birth defects and reproductive harm." Yet, in 2009, the FDA ruled unequivocally that mercury fillings were safe for everyone, including children, and pregnant women. Our own State Department has recently endorsed the eventual phase-out of mercury fillings as part of a global treaty to ban the use of mercury-containing products. Yet, despite the years of promises from the FDA, nothing has been done. Our own president, in his recent speech in September, and I quote, said, "We have to keep our kids from being exposed to mercury." Dr. Shoren, it's a no-brainer. Mercury is a poison. It doesn't belong in the human body. How many more Americans must be subjected to these fillings, the most toxic element on this earth besides plutonium? How many more Americans have to suffer as I did, as Stacey Case did, as the others you've heard tonight or this morning? While our government does nothing, time is running out. The government is spending billions of dollars to care for people who have these related diseases, such as MS, lupus, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and ALS. Can you tell us when and what FDA plans to do in terms of ridding the dental profession from using mercury fillings? They really have to be banned. There's no use. There's no reason to continue its use. There are safe alternatives that are being used around the world, even in underserved countries. Even in this country, on Indian reservations, they're using a non-mercury filling. I hope everybody in this audience hears what I'm saying and what everybody else has said. Don't allow a mercury filling to be placed in your teeth or your children's teeth. Thank you.
So for the next about hour and a half, we are just opening up the microphones for people who want to ask questions. Again, I ask to please keep the questions short so that there's an opportunity for everyone who wants to get up to do so. If you do want to come up to the microphone, there are two of them on either side of the room. I'll just ask you to come up and we'll alternate between the microphones. Why don't we start over here?
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Robert Cartland. I'm an engineering physicist from Southern California. We heard a lot today about dental amalgam and the FDA approval process. And ironically, dental amalgam never had to undergo that process. In December, there was a meeting to discuss dental amalgam. I became interested as a patient and a scientist to write a paper on that, based on that debate at that meeting, and I'm happy to share it with anybody here. At that meeting, we heard dentist Amit Ismail say, "We have to find ways to recognize that there are some patients who cannot and should not have amalgam." We heard a toxicologist from the EPA, Susan Griffin, say, "I want to echo my concerns that there does appear to be a very susceptible subpopulation to immunological effects." We heard the pediatric neurologist from the Mayo Clinic, Suresh Kodagal, say, "Infant and children need to be addressed separately than adults because of the increased risk." And I think that there really is perhaps no place for mercury in children. Dennis Van Thompson agreed. Definitely not in pregnant women, and definitely not in those below 6 years of age. The Swedish government has created a commission in 2004 for those suffering from amalgam-related illness. They've actually banned amalgam. Their commission still says that those who relate their symptoms to dental amalgam or other dental materials still feel that they are meeting nonchalant response in the care services and not receiving the treatment they believe they need. These patients, who often have a long history of illness, have undergone many courses of treatment with only limited effect on their symptoms. Many have, in due course, had their fillings removed. In some cases, they have reported mitigation of their symptoms as a result. At that meeting, many dozens of us reported the same thing, and there have been at least 5 peer-reviewed studies showing, sometimes with hundreds of patients, mitigation of health problems following amalgam removal. Anthony Watson, this is my last quote, of the FDA concluded the meeting saying, "We're going to go back, as I mentioned, and really hit this, and hopefully we'll come out with something that everyone can be proud of." My question is, when will the FDA come out with something that everyone can be proud of?
So when I came to CDRH, and this was in late 2009, we had received concerns about prior assessments of of the evidence on dental amalgam. And one of the things I did is I reconvened the advisory panel. And we had that meeting in December, as you know, 2010. We've gone back and we looked at the evidence, and what I can tell you is we intend to come out with an announcement by the end of this year.
And what will that be?
Well, you see, if I were saying that, then I'd be announcing it today. But in all seriousness, no, we are coming out with, that is our intent, come out with an announcement by the end of the year, and then we'll explain things at that point. But we are wrapping up on that right now.
Why don't you tell us?
From Reye syndrome. And they did all they could do. It was diagnosed quickly. And I later, well, it's a brain inflammation. And so I began to learn from my study what causes this kind of a problem. And I realized every day in my practice I'm working with a neurotoxin, which is mercury. And so I began examining that and realizing, hey, I'm doing something pretty bad here. I was taught traditionally, hey, it's an alloy, it's safe, it's covered with saliva in the mouth, don't worry about it, there's no problem. Well, first of all, it's not an alloy. There's no shared electrons with dental amalgam. A lot of things mixed together. And secondly, mercury comes out of that restoration every single minute of the day, and even much more when you raise the temperature. Now, when that mercury was delivered to my office, it was pretty darn toxic, and we've already heard this. And when it's in the mouth, well, it's supposedly safe. But when I take it out, it has to go in a Class A toxic waste dump. If I throw it in the garbage becomes a toxic hazardous waste. There's a lot of protocols now to protect the environment from this mercury, but it still hasn't been put on the environment in the mouth. And that's what I'm concerned about. I switched a couple years later, stopped using the mercury fillings, the mercury amalgam. I started treating a lot of patients with systemic problems. One of them in particular at that time in the 80s was called Candida, a kind of a systemic form. They didn't get better until they got the mercury out of their body and got the parasites out of their gut. There are so many systemic effects from mercury. So my goal was to remove the toxins. Safe practices is a great procedure in dentistry where we take the mercury out of people in a safe way to reduce the exposure that they have. So if someone in here is responding to this sensationalistic approach or announcement, don't run out and get your mercury out. Learn about how to do it safely so you're protected by safe practices and a dentist that's trained in that. It's very important that we know how toxic this material is. And my question is, you know, I think there's a maximum on what we can ingest or breathe each day of 30 micrograms per day. Yet we poop 150 micrograms per day. So there's a lot of exposure out there, and a lot of it's coming from dental amalgam. A question is, what requirement will you put as to how many micrograms per day are you willing to be okay to expose the consumer to? What will the FDA say is okay for the consumer to be exposed to? Now, there's a great paper that Dave Kennedy has. I don't know if you're going to talk about it, Dr. Kennedy. I'm going to just comment a few things. It's an article that just came out in 2011 in the Journal of Clinical Hypertension, and the title is Role of Mercury Toxicity in Hypertension, Cardiovascular Disease, and Stroke. There's a lot of evidence showing that it's significantly involved. It binds to metallothionein and substitutes for zinc, copper, and other trace metals, reduces the effectiveness of metalloenzymes. Mercury induces mitochondrial dysfunction. Have we heard that with the girl that had autism, and they said, oh, it wasn't caused by mercury, it was caused by mitochondrial dysfunction. Well, mercury induces mitochondrial dysfunction. Increased oxidative stress and reduced oxidative defense are common. Selenium and fish containing omega-3 fatty acids antagonize mercury toxicity. The overall vascular effects of mercury include increased oxidative stress and inflammation, reduced oxidative defense, thrombosis, vascular smooth muscle dysfunction, endothelial dysfunction. You can go on and on and on about the pathological effects of the most toxic material beside the radioactive materials. We have to look at it. We have to have better regulation. So my question was, is there going to be a standard or a maximum dose to which a consumer can be exposed to, other than the 30 micrograms per day that we can ingest or eat, because we poop a lot more?
So here I go back to Washington, D.C. speak. It's our intent to make an announcement by the end of this year.
Good.
So you're welcome.
Dr. Sheeran, I just have, are you speaking? I'm sorry.
We're also putting an SOP in practice that...
I apologize, I thought you were finished. I just have a quick yes or no question. I'm wondering, when you make your announcement on silver mercury amalgam fillings this year, will people like me be happy with the announcement? Just yes or no? Even a maybe would be good.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Thank you.
I feel, by the way, like I'm being up testifying before Congressman Dingell. If anyone's watched, Congressman Dingell only asks yes or no questions. And he sits there and goes, just answer yes or no. And he's asked some questions where, so how much does it cost to do the following? Yes or no? So I feel like I just got a Congressman Dingell question.
Thank you.